No, it's the time. 5 minutes.
No. Well, it is 7:05.
That's like Sarah being 127 years old.
Exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was
The section for the Torah in its time for Chai Sarah is on page 127.
Oh, that is cool.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Harriet noticed that earlier today. It was
The first sentence is out of 127 when she got very nice.
it was a very interesting coincidence, serendipity, or someone planned it. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. But we are on chapter 5, Mishnah 7, which this should tonight, Bezrat Hashem, with the help of God, bring us to the end of Avodah Zarah. And then we will prepare ourselves so that next week we can begin Megillah, which is studying more than just how to read the Megillah for Purim, but has a lot of other topics as well. So we'll begin that next week. Good? Okay, but before we talk about the future, let's talk about the present, Avodah Zarah.
Actually, the past.
Well, yes and no. You know, as we've talked about throughout the entire section of Avodah Zarah, we do live in a time where 99% of the people we're likely to bump into are not Ovdei Chochavim. They're not idol worshippers. They're not pagans and worshiping the stars and all of that. But the themes are still important, reminding us that we need to still be avoiding idolatry, even if it's not in the shape of a statue, but of idolatry of any type, is still very important. And it's also a little bit like taking a victory lap. We live in a society where we don't have to worry about most of these issues because we're not surrounded by idolaters. Should make us feel good, because the reason we're not surrounded by idolaters is because of us. Now, we didn't go around getting rid of them all, but the ideas of Judaism as spread outwards through civilization have done a really good job of pushing idolatry away from the normal human way of worship. That began with us, and that happened because of us and our effort. So the fact that this seems so weird is our success. It's kind of like when someone says, "What's measles? I've never heard of measles." That means we've done our job. When those diseases, like polio are a thing of history, that means we've done our job. And when idolatry seems like it is only in the past, yasher koach to us, that means we're doing our job. So yes, it is definitely more from the past than the present, and that's only to our credit. It doesn't make it worthless, it just makes it something that we need to say yes. All right, so chapter 5, Mishnah 7, more on the wine, right? Nesach continues to be our major topic. And remember, the big issue here is, you're not allowed to benefit from the wine, but under random, bizarre circumstances, might there be an issue of benefiting in secondary or tertiary type of ways? So 5-7, if you wouldn't mind.
Point number 1, if a non-Jew sent to Jewish craftsmen a cask of yayin nesach as their wages, they are allowed to say to him, "Give us its value in money."
Right, which would be natural, because if it shows up as a cask of wine, I'm not allowed to benefit from it. I can't even resell it. So I am allowed to ask for it to be exchanged in some other currency. However,
but after the wine has come into their possession, prohibited.
All right, so once it is your wine, you're not allowed to say, "Could you take it back and give me money instead?" As long as it's not your wine, as long as you have not accepted delivery, so to speak, then you're allowed to say, tell you what. But once it is in your possession, you're stuck with it.
You can't even touch it.
Yeah, you can't take it. You can't receive it, right? Once it is in your possession, then it is no longer something you can send back, because now when you're sending it back, you're benefiting from it through the exchange.
It's sort of like if FedEx dropped it at the front door and you came home 3 hours later, but it's now yours.
Right. So modern day deliveries are a bit more tricky of who owns what. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why Amazon is coming out with this Amazon Key thing, where they have the camera and the smart lock. You guys didn't hear about this?
No.
They're coming out with this thing where they have a camera that you put in your house and you point it at your door, and you've got a smart lock, which Amazon can control. So when they come to deliver the package, the person identifies themselves electronically as being from Amazon. The door unlocks, they step in, the camera registers them, they put the package down, and they leave. And this way it proves that the package was on your property.
I never would
And trust me,
I would too.
people are freaking out. I mean, luckily it's voluntary. It's not mandatory.
Anyway.
But
But
the camera shows you, so the guy knows he's being filmed, so he's not going to go running around your house.
and the person is an employee
He's an
of
employee
Amazon, right? This is only where Amazon has their own
I
delivery.
have-
Manipulate the computer, the system,
Yeah.
so they don't record, okay, and someone steal.
Oh, no,
or
I
they
Oh, no, there's all
they-
sorts of problems.
I have a smart
Yeah.
lock at my house too. I can open it. Anytime a workman would come to the house,
Right.
I would open it for him, and then when he left, I would lock it. So I would never have to give him a key
Right.
that he could maybe make a copy of. So I found it much safer. And I never had them do anything bad. They fixed what they had to fix and left.
Right.
each time.
So that's the theory behind this. And so, yes, taking possession gets more complicated in the modern world than it was for our ancestors. But once it is definitely, by whatever standard you're using, in your possession, once it belongs to you, you can't do anything with it. All you can do is destroy it. Because to exchange it, to sell it, you're now benefiting from this. Again, think of the wine not as being just wine. Think of it as being like a golden idol. You know, once someone has given you a statue of Zeus, and they gave it to you as a real idol, not as something that had been deconsecrated, not as something that had been desecrated, not as something that had been nullified, as we talked about in previous chapels. What? A golden Zeus. And they said, you know, may this statue, you know, be an object of worship for you, and may it, you know, bless your house. And I mean, really, they were clear. This is right. You can't give it back to them, because once it's in your possession, you're not allowed to give an idol to anyone. And you can't nullify it, because only an idolater can nullify their idols. You have to go drop it in the Dead Sea.
Can you melt it? No?
You can melt it to defigure it, but you still can't. But you can't keep the gold.
Can you give it to another idol?
Absolutely not.
Oh,
Because
there's
you gotta
no
be-
benefit.
You're encouraging idolatry.
You are
Yeah.
reinforcing the sin that they release.
Right. If someone gives you a hand grenade, are you going to give it to another person who's angry and say, "Here, you have a hand grenade"? Yeah. I don't have anybody I want to kill today, but maybe you do. Go on. Same kind of problem. So yeah, once it's yours, it's got to be trashed. So that means you lose the value of
How do
the.
we have a lot of idols in the Red Sea?
You know, unfortunately, for many of our ancestors, actually pretty good at collecting idols. You know, the archaeology is pretty strong that Jews like their idols during the First Temple period. So not a whole lot of them would have reached the level of destruction. And after that, I think our neighbors were aware that you don't give us idols, and so that we didn't end up with a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, that would be a good deal, a good business. You sell to the North tribes.
But the southern tribes worshipped idols too,
But we were
not only the north.
No, but less than.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, I've only killed 5 people, you killed 20 people. You're a much bigger sinner than me.
But I
Right.
think
So
it's-
so yes, the southern tribes were on the whole slightly less addicted to idolatry than the north. The north was completely awash. The southern was only up to their ankles. So it's better, but still not good.
But I can see how this was. As a Jewish people, we had only lived among the Egyptians, for example,
Mhm.
which slaughtered animals and slaughtered virgins in the fields,
Right.
let the things grow, and worshipped idols. And I think what God was doing was gradually weaning us from that. Because you can't all of a sudden say, look, guys, no statues, no nothing. I'm up in the sky. You'll never see me. You can't have anything. We couldn't do that.
Well, we can actually, and that is what God asked us to do.
But he could
And-
see that it would take us more time. So we got rid of the idols,
Right.
but not the animal sacrifice for our sins. That was a little more gradual.
Well, now you're
also.
getting into the question of what the sacrifices for the animals represented, and Rambam agrees with you. Other commentators didn't.
Because I think we eventually outgrew it.
Right.
And God finally said, okay, now I will allow the temple to be destroyed because you can worship from your heart, you can pray, you don't need to kill something to do it. But it took us a long time.
Well, you and
I can
Maimonides
see that.
agree about the sacrifices,
Yeah.
not so much about the destruction
No,
of the
I know,
temple,
most people don't want to say that.
but in terms of the role of the sacrifices as being a temporary
Yes,
measure,
That's it,
Rambam does have that opinion,
right.
but many other commentators do not.
But and as far as the idolatry goes, it was who we were. You know, you're blaming the North had more and stuff. But I can see how if you live in those times and someone says to you all of a sudden, no statues, nothing that you could see, is a God whom you can't see. I could see how for the average person that's hard to accept.
It is both natural to be idolatrous and also unnatural to be idolatrous, right? It's natural because if everyone else around you has
Everyone else is.
statues, it's perfectly normal.
Right.
But it's also unnatural, right? This is the whole point of the Nevi'im, the prophets. I mean, Isaiah and Jeremiah, they say it so beautifully. You go to the forest, you cut down a tree,
Right.
and you take part of it and you make an idol, and the other part of it used to cook dinner,
Yeah.
and now you call this the thing that has birthed you? You call this father? I mean,
It's a good point.
what are you, stupid?
No, these are smart
Right?
people who understood. These were the Einsteins of their time.
No,
who
you don't need to be an
understood.
Einstein
I
to
think
know that the
Love
rock
seems-
you picked up yesterday and
Yeah.
you hit with the chisel, or the mud that you have shaped into a statue, didn't give you life. There is no divinity there. And if you put a bowl of food in front of it, it's not going to somehow help you. Right? You don't need to be an Einstein to know that that's crazy. On the other hand, is something that gets into our heart very, very easily.
That's right.
Right? If you hear somebody say, "Oh, well, you know, I heard it's bad luck if you dot 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 dot,"
The Hamza.
how easy do people pick up?
Hamza.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not
Everybody
a
used to the Hamza.
it's not a native Jewish symbol, but
Right.
you know, it couldn't hurt,
Right.
right? It couldn't hurt. I could do with a little more good luck.
My mom always say, I don't believe in witches, but just in case.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And that's where idolatry a foothold, right? I'm not saying that your mother's an idolater,
No.
but
No, no, no.
but that part is where the clear belief that Isaiah and the other prophets had, who said, "How can you do this? That's so stupid." It's like, well, you don't start off by going to the forest and saying, "I'm going to worship the stick that I bring home." You start off with little things that lead eventually to the big things. Okay.
Okay.
Speaking of big things, let's keep moving.
Number 2, if a Jew sells his wine to a non-Jew, the price before he measured it out, the purchase money is permitted.
Go ahead and read part A.
But should he have measured it out before he set the price, the purchase money is prohibited.
All right. So this is well, here we'll use my cup, right? So this is my example, right? So you are a non-Jew and you come to me, the Jewish wine seller, and you want to buy a glass of wine or a cask of wine or a bottle of wine or whatever. And so we agree you're going to pay me $20 for the wine. Good. It's all set. No problem. I pour the wine. I give it to you. You give me the $20. It's okay, right? Because the money was already owed to me before you took possession. Because once you take possession, this becomes forbidden wine. And that means I can't benefit by you giving me money for it. You have to have been clear about the money that was due to me. Okay.
Right.
All right. So the permitted version, right? The permitted version is you want to buy some wine for me and you're an idolater. And I say, great, it's going to be $20. And you say, all right, agreed. Good. I pour the wine. You take the wine. I get the money. Problem version would be you want to buy some wine. Great. We pour the wine. I give you the wine, and then I say, it's $20. Problem version.
Yeah, but what if you have a sign there that says $20? It's a way that you didn't say, but you say it's there.
Yeah, but look in Chayei Sarah. Nobody actually posts the sign for anything. I mean, you don't actually advertise your price, because if the guy shows up at the market, you might be able to get him to pay more.
Yes.
Right? You haggle, you barter, because the value of this bottle of wine is different between you and you and you and you. Right? You need this because your wife needs a bottle of wine because you're in trouble. And you need this because you have guests coming over, so maybe your value is even higher than his. You need this because you're just feeling a little thirsty, right? And you need this because you need it in a month from now. You're each going to want to pay different amounts for this bottle. The idea of having a price tag set on our shelves is a very modern European invention. And it was originally invented, if you'll allow me to digress for a moment for commercial history, the price tag model was originally invented in order to have salespeople that you could pay less. Because you needed an intelligent and knowledgeable salesperson to barter for you, the manager, the owner of the business, with every customer. But if you could set the price with a little tag on it, then all the salesperson had to know how to do was count. Because if I say $20 and you give me $50, I have to give you your change. That's all I need to do as a salesperson. But if they come in and there are no prices and the customer asks them, how much is this? The salesperson has to know what this is, has to know how to deal with the customers in order for the business to thrive. And so American stores, from what I remember reading, began the practice in order to be able to hire cheaper workers of having pre-priced goods in their stores, because that way you didn't need knowledgeable sales staff. Doesn't hurt, but you can pay the dumb ones less, and that way you don't need to worry about it. And so that was when they began to slap price tags on things. But before that, the truth was the real truth of every economic system you've ever. Yeah. My daughter needs to get in to collect my son.
Oh.
He's you what? No, they're fine. They're fine. She'll get in the thing. He's in the social hall with his friend, so his friend was able to stay a bit later, so that's why he's not hanging out in the room. So just wait, make sure that my children are taken care of. Oh, I heard the buys. That's what I needed to hear. Okay. So prior to that, and really built into every economic theory book you've ever read, is there's no such thing as price, there's only value. And value is, like as a real estate person, you have to know this, right? The value is, what is this worth to the buyer? And what is it going to take for the seller to let go of it? And that number is not some magic number that exists in the perfect heaven that comes down and sets as a price tag. Because you have to find where that magic value is that is shared between the two parties that are having the sale. But it's much cheaper and easier to mass market and sell things by having price tags, which, by the way, online retail is now undoing. Amazon is going back to a flexible price model. Not that you get to haggle with Amazon, but the price you see on Amazon may be different than the price you see, and the price you see in the morning may be different than the price you see in the afternoon.
Why?
Because it is automatically responding to fluctuations in supply and demand. So
between you and me at the same time, why would we see different prices?
Because based upon our purchase history and our location and other things, Amazon makes estimates of whether or not we are more likely to buy it at a higher price or whether we're going to need a lower price to convince us.
So Amazon is trying to create a community.
Well,
because if I know that, I will call you, hey, can you check what's your price? And let's see what is worth less.
Right.
So,
and there are lots of third-party sites. You don't even need other human beings, unfortunately, where you can do searches to see what the average prices are for certain things in order to try and find the best price.
Well, you go on Craigslist and you offer something and somebody else offers
exactly.
more.
So
it sounds to me like, I'm sorry, it's like for the Christmas season that you always get like certain toys that are
That's right.
Absolutely
in great demand, and all of a sudden the toy's $200 instead of $10. You know, that's what I'm thinking.
Yep, absolutely. And sometimes I'll get deal alerts, by people will say, oh, there's a great price on such and such a book. And by the time I get there, so many people have bought it, that great deal's not there anymore. Right? It's not that they sold out. It's just they don't need to offer that cheaply anymore because there's enough demand that they can raise the price, and people who have come looking for the deal go, oh, it's only $2 more. I guess I'll still buy it. And now they've made more profit. And so that is getting rid of the whole fixed price tag model of economics.
You're always afraid to pay too much.
Yeah, on the other hand, you can put something in your cart and occasionally you'll go back later and Amazon will say the price on this has dropped by 5%.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes if you just put it in your wish list and wait for a while, the price will go down. And that's not just because it suddenly got cheaper to make. It's because they're going, come on. It's how you haggle, it's how you barter, but it's being done without words. It's being done by the computer. So anyway, that's what's happening in part 2. Part 3. It's similar, but not precisely.
If a Jew took a funnel and measured wine into a non-Jew's flask, and then measured some into a Jew's flask, should a drop of the first wine have remained in the funnel, then the wine measured into the second flask is prohibited.
Okay. So this is literally talking about a drop in the funnel, right? Because if I've measured your wine, then the drop that's left in the funnel, even though it's not in your flask, is technically the wine you purchased, right? It's like the dust that's left over on the scale. Yes, it's technically not in your flask, but it is your purchase. It happens to be left clinging to my funnel, and that means I need to either wipe my funnel very carefully, or I need to be prepared that the next thing I pour through it is going to be considered just a little bit, by one drop, your yain nefsech, and that means it is prohibited. Now, why that one drop rule? We're going to get to a later Mishnah where it talks about that. But that's what they're talking about, this drop in the funnel. Make sense? Because not everything is a one drop rule. As those of you who keep kosher know. What's that?
It goes against a lot of kosher stuff, because they say sometimes if you have a drop of something that is not kosher falling into a big
Yes.
pot.
Yes. Usually the standard rule is that something can be nullified if it's less than 1/60th.
Yeah.
And there are also other rules that things can go according to the majority. So those are both important and different topics. And for those of you who are staying for the bonus kashrut discussions, we will eventually get there. But this one drop rule does apply to certain scenarios. And we're going to look at a whole list of those scenarios if we get there, which we're going to get there tonight. All right, but here we get the first drop of the one drop rule. Okay.
So the way to fix this is just to clear it.
Yes.
If
there's no drop left, right, then we're fine. Then we're fine.
Number 4, if he poured from his own vessel into a non-Jew's vessel, the wine in the vessel from which he poured is permitted, and the wine in the vessel into which he poured is prohibited.
All right, so we see the distinction here?
Yes.
There's no more funnel. It's just me with good aim. Right, so now because there's no intermediate object that's collecting the drops, then the drops that are left in my original thing are not considered to be his purchase. Therefore, it's not a problem. So I fill up his jug becomes prohibited because it's now considered libation wine of an idolater. My cask is still fine. It's okay. It's not like a funnel. It's a complete break. And he drops in my cask. He technically owns the drops in the funnel because that was the measured amount. Make sense? Kind of. Good. I know. All right. So we move on to 5.8. And we're going to continue with this one drop version.
Point 1 is yayin nesech and renders other wine prohibited by the smallest quantity.
All right, so the first half of this Mishnah is like, yeah, we kind of already knew that it was prohibited, right? We've been working with this for a whole time. I mean, we've been how many different Mishnayot we've been talking about the prohibition, but they are trying to make it clear. And remember, the Mishnayot are not always built in ascending order. Sometimes it's just the most natural way to put the collection together. So it's prohibited, and it is also prohibiting other things, meaning when it's mixed with other things, the smallest amount, that other wine would be rendered prohibited.
Also, if it's less than 1/60.
Any amount, right? So, I've got my giant barrel of kosher wine, and you've got your little bottle of wine, and I take an eyedropper and I take a little drop and I walk over to the barrel and I put it in, bam, the whole barrel is prohibited.
Yeah.
The whole barrel is prohibited.
That makes sense.
What's that?
Oh, that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't, right? So let's take another example, right? Imagine it's not a question of someone deliberately with an eyedropper, but imagine it is, he's sitting there talking to me and he's raising his glass and he's saying, l'chaim, right? Because that's what idolaters say. And when he puts his glass up, a little drop flies over into my giant vat. It was an accident. It renders the entire thing prohibited. Now, by comparison, let's imagine I have my giant pot of meat stew and my neighbor comes by with his cafe latte, with milk in it, and he says l'chaim, and a little drop of his cafe latte flies over and falls into my meat stew.
No problem.
The meat stew is still kosher, right? Because it's less than 1/60th, and it was an accidental contamination. It's not going to be tasted. It's not an issue. So we are dealing with a different level of stringency when we're dealing with this idolatrous wine. So that's what's standing out here. Okay. Onward.
Point 3. Point 2.
Point 2, yes.
Point 2. Wine mixed with wine and water with water prohibits by the smallest quantity.
So again, we've introduced the topic here that the Mishnah thinks you already know, which is sometimes idolaters would also make holy water. They would make water that was used for their idolatrous practices. And that too has the same status as the wine. That if you put a drop of their idolatrous water into your water is also prohibited. It's not only with wine. And this is where we're going to sort of grow this topic of what a small amount can do to prohibit a larger volume.
Wine mixed with water and water with wine disqualifies when the prohibited element imparts a flavor.
Okay, so this idea of imparting a flavor, again, is going to come back a lot when we study kashrut. But here what they're saying is that if it's one mixed with one, if it actually changes the other, we have a problem, right? If it changes the ta'am, the flavor. But if it doesn't, then it's not such an issue.
But everything changed. Because wine in water also changed the taste of the water. And water in wine also changed because the wine is not so pure. So either way,
I'm afraid I'm going to have to challenge you, right? So imagine you have your 1 liter bottle of water, and someone walks up behind you without you knowing, and they put a few drops of wine in it. You really think you're going to be able to tell that has wine in it now?
depending how much.
Depending how much. Enough to taste. Right? So 1 milliliter, you're not going to taste it out of a liter. Right? 5 milliliters, maybe, depends on how strong it is. Right? 100 milliliters, probably. Right? 250 milliliters out of a liter, yeah, it's 25%, of course. Right? So that's why the benchmark is not a percentage, but the flavor, the ta'am, right? Can you taste it? If you can taste it, it's real. If you can't taste it, it's insignificant. And that, as you said, it depends. So that's why they're talking about different wines would have different pungencies. Even the water back then would have different pungencies. So they're going off taste. And like I said, that becomes a very important principle in kashrut in general. But here it's being used for this wine and water.
And in this case, we're talking about wine that was owned by a non-Jew. It's forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I put seltzer in my wine, both are okay, that's okay. It's not just the mixture, it's the wrong kind of wine.
Oh, yeah. It's got to have the prohibited element to it.
Element,
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. It wasn't clear in that part.
Yes. If you just have Manischewitz and Perrier, and you want to pour it together, God help you, but it's it's still kosher.
We used to do the wine with the seltzer.
Yeah?
Yeah, you can't carbonated wine, but I remember we used to
Oh,
do that.
right, the wine spritzers and all of that. Yeah. I do remember that now.
Yes, okay, as long as that's still okay. I wouldn't want to think that.
No, that's still permitted. It may not be very popular, but it's permitted.
Yes.
So my mom also always drink a wine with Sprite.
Yes.
She loves it.
You know, that's what she likes. That's what she likes. It's perfectly kosher.
This is with the forbidden
Right,
wine.
exactly. However, she shouldn't be drinking the wine from Zeus.
Even with Sprite.
Yeah. All right.
About it.
Yes?
Years ago, I got 2 types of wines. One was very dry,
Right.
One was sweet. And my kids didn't like the sour one.
Of course.
So it's okay to mix 2 wines?
Yes, in general, for the benefit, right? So there is a bit of a question about whenever you're serving wine, you always have to serve better wine after worse wine. Prove the quality of the wine, because we should always be ascending during our celebrations. That's catering 101 by the rabbis. But it's good advice. So if you are doing it to stretch the wine and to deceive people about what, because you're trying to make the cheap wine mixing with expensive wine to make the expensive one. Well, or even if you're deceiving your guests, then that's a bit of a problem. But if it's in order to improve both wines, that's okay. Because mixing wine is normal.
Consumption, not easy to also.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, many wineries, that's how they do it. They mix wine from all sorts of different grapes.
Yes.
But they say on the label that that's what they're doing because they believe it makes a better wine. And that's perfectly fine. As long as it's clear, not deceptive, then you're good.
Now I can sleep at night.
You've been worried about this for so long.
Yes.
Point 3. This is the general rule. with the same type, the mixture is disqualified by the smallest quantity. But with a different type, it is disqualified when the prohibited element imparts a flavor.
Okay, why is that distinction the general rule? That a drop of wine...
Because it's more difficult to taste the difference.
Exactly.
Taste it.
Bidiyuk, right? You cannot tell that there was a little bit of idolatrous wine in a bottle of kosher wine. Because it's wine, right? You're not going to be able, I mean, unless you're some like really fancy guy who can tell the difference of every wine. And oh, this is from 1840. For most of us, wine is wine. And if you pour a little extra wine from one bottle to another, maybe if you pour enough to change the flavor from sour to sweet, I might be able to tell. Definitely more than you would need to change the flavor of water and wine if you were mixing the opposite. So when you're mixing the same thing, the benchmark is any amount. But if you're mixing opposites, then it becomes much easier to know when the flavor is going to change. So much logic.
Very much.
Yes. All right. Mishnah 5:9.
5.1. The following are prohibited and render prohibited.
Right. So as long as we're talking about this one drop rule, which, by the way, I hope no one is thinking is referring to anything like the racist policies that were in American past. You guys don't know about the one-drop rule. All the Jim Crow laws and racist laws in America, that if you had one drop of African-American blood, you were considered to be African-American.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe I was more aware and sensitive of that, but just making sure that people weren't going down that road. Because, yeah, Judaism doesn't do drops of blood, but it does do drops of wine. And so make sure that we are on the same page. As long as we're talking about things that can be disqualified, a larger quantity that can be disqualified by a minute quantity, let's do a list of all sorts of things that can have the same sort of problem. Not all of them are wine.
So these are the prohibited things. 1, a cask of yayin nesech.
Right, which is what we've been talking about.
2, an idolatrous object.
Okay, so this is, imagine you walk into the antique store and there are a dozen statues of Zeus. One of them was really used by a real idolater, but I'm not going to tell you which one. Guess what? You don't get to buy any of them. Right? They're prohibited. If the guy says, oh yeah, the guy brought him in, he said there was one that he worshipped and the rest were just decoration. But there's like 1 out of 100. So you're probably safe. Just buy one of them, and what are the odds you're going to get the real idol one? The odds are I'm not buying it, right? If there's a drop of an object within the ocean of other objects that are the same, and I can't tell which one is really idolatrous and which one isn't, then I can't. If you say, this is my rock collection, I used to worship one of them. All right, all the rocks are gone.
One of the examples my husband uses, here's 100 M&Ms. One of them is poison, but here, take one.
Right, now, there is, like I said, in many other topics, there is, in fact, a rule that you can go by the majority. Again, kashrut is where we see this most often. For example, if you are walking down the street, and yes, this is what would have been normal in the ancient world, and there is a piece of meat, and the majority of the people who live in the neighborhood are Jewish and therefore keep kosher, assume that the piece of meat is kosher. You don't need to, because you can't check anything on the meat. A piece of kosher meat and a piece of non-kosher meat look the same. So it doesn't say OU on it, right? It's not burnt into the bone.
Circle K.
Right. So in that particular case, if you have a bowl of meat, tells you, well, there are a couple non-Jews around here. You do get to still eat all of the meat, right? If they say the majority of the people around here aren't non-Jewish, to assume that they're non-kosher. But even if you kind of think that one of them might be not kosher, as long as you don't have any evidence to believe that specifically, then you are allowed to. So it gets more complicated in mixtures.
That one makes sense. If you think of the times when people lived, there wasn't that much food. You wouldn't want to waste stuff you didn't have to. On the other hand, if someone said to you, here's a pot of purely kosher beef, and there's 2 pieces of pork mixed into it, but don't worry about it, it's kosher beef, I might hesitate over wanting to eat it. But when you're years ago, you didn't know where your next meal was coming from.
We'll cover kashrut, and indeed, one of the
Yeah.
reasons why stringencies have become more stringent in the modern world is because we have the luxury of wealth.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it allows us to have 13 different sets of dishes and 3 different stoves and all the other things
Yes.
that people think they need to keep kosher. But yeah, it's really a luxury to be able to live like that, and not necessarily a good one.
I can't remember if we can have an idol as a decoration. We say no.
An idolatrous decoration,
No, like
I do.
idol
right?
as a decoration. We say no.
Not a real idol, no.
So why your example that you want to go to buy one
Right.
over 100?
So,
Anyway, you don't supposed to be there.
well, remember, if it's been an annulled idol, then it's okay.
Okay.
Right, because I can melt it down. I can use I can use it. I can sell it for something else. If it's no longer
Okay.
treated as an idol, then I have a way to relate to the object as a material object that's different than as a spiritual object. But if I can't tell which one's only a statue and which one is still worshipped by somebody who didn't annul it, then I'm kind of stuck. But yeah, you shouldn't be decorating your house with Zeus. It's not a good
No.
it's not a good Jewish design motif. My baby's bedroom. I'm gonna do it in Greek pantheon. Actually, I could imagine someone doing
I
that.
can imagine that. Yes.
I like the Perry Jackson books, so I'm gonna do it all in Greek guides.
Diana's a big fan.
Yeah.
She's now has a PhD mythology.
Except a lot of his books I find are wrong. I mean, the mythology is still there. I mean, it's still drawn from Greek mythology, but he changed so much of the old stories to make them new, which I understand. He's selling new books. That a lot of kids think they know Greek mythology, but they know his very modern version of it. And stories are very interesting, and they tell a lot about Greek culture, and they're important culturally to know. But you don't really learn them by reading his books. But you don't really learn it. It's children's literature. It came out after Harry Potter, and people realized that kids enjoy and like mythological stories, like they always have. That's why we have fairy tales. But yeah, it's from that sort of genre. Okay, onward, or we'll never make it.
Yeah. Also prohibited, number 3, skins of animals which have holes over the heart.
Which, as we mentioned before, that's the way idolaters would sacrifice. They cut the hole, bring the heart out, sacrifice the heart. So if you see a skin like this, exactly. Well, the assumption is it's idolater, and you mix it with other ones that also have holes over the heart that were not idolatrous, because maybe you did them yourself. If you can't tell which one was which, all of them are prohibited. So your idolatrous neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, I see you're collecting hides. Good news, I threw a few of mine on the back pile." What? Now you can't use any of them in the pile because you don't know which ones were his and which ones were not his. So yeah, it's a random example, but yes, that's the idea.
Also prohibited is 4, an ox which has been sentenced to be stoned.
Nothing to do with idolatry, right? This is the ox that had gored and murdered somebody, and the punishment for that, well, punishment, but the way we dispose of the ox is by stoning it. If you are taking the ox and you are leading it to the place of stoning, and it breaks loose and runs amok a bunch of other ox, now all of them are prohibited, right? Because one of them is definitely the ox that's supposed to be stoned, and you can't just say, "Oh, we'll take one of them and that's good enough." And so all of them become prohibited.
How would they have killed the ox otherwise? Is there a different method?
I mean, for food,
I don't know. Why would you?
they would
kill for food. They would
shechita, right? To slaughter, right?
But even if it's just been sentenced to be stoned.
Well, once it's sentenced to be stoned, that is the punishment or the action that it deserves. I mean, punishment's a bit of a strong word.
Right.
But it is now slated for death as an execution rather than as dinner.
Right.
And once that happens, it gets a special status that cannot be simply bartered away by substituting another cow for it. It has to be that cow. And if you can't tell which cow is that cow, you can't just use a random cow. And you definitely can't use one of those cows for something else, like dinner or work, because then you might be letting the other cow be used for something else. So all of them are just put aside.
But why is that related to the idolater?
It isn't. It's relating to the one drop rule.
Ah,
One
okay.
cow in the herd ruins the herd.
Oh, okay, okay. It's not related.
No, no, only the first three are idolatrous. And all the other ones that are happening here are non-idolatrous, but follow the same. One drop ruins the group.
Heifer whose neck was broken.
Right, so the Egel Arufah, this was when you had a corpse in the middle of a field, and you had to bring out a cow in order to designate it as a kind of a sacrifice, sort of. It's a whole long, complicated discussion. If the cow that had been designated, before it gets there and has the neck broken, runs and joins the herd, the whole herd becomes off limits, right? Because it's now mixed into them. And once it's designated, once it has that particular status, you can't replace it with a substitute.
But this heifer,
or rather, you can replace it with a substitute, but you can't redeem it. And therefore, you can't use it, get it back, and do anything else with it other than take it and have its neck
But
broken.
that's the point of the ox. But point 5 says a heifer whose neck has already been broken, not one sentence.
No. It can't be the one whose neck was broken because it's not moving. It's not going to mix itself up with
But I
others.
thought what it means is this was not a kosher slaughter, so you
No.
can't use it.
No, it's a technical term that's used, and the adjective that's used, the arufah, means broken. That title before the ceremony's been done. It's kind of like, with an execution, you may say dead man walking.
Right.
He's not actually dead.
Yes, sir.
Should be very soon. And so too for this cow. Once it's been designated, even though the break hasn't happened.
Also prohibited are birds brought as an offering by a leper.
All right, so you're supposed to bring up these birds as an offering once you have been proclaimed clean. Again, he's no longer considered a leper. So he's bringing up these offerings, and leprosy really isn't the right word. About that, when we cover Mitzorah and what's going on. Zarah is not the modern disease we call leprosy. But the birds that he was supposed to bring, they get mixed up in other birds, all the birds off limits.
The hair offering of a Nazirite.
At the end of the Nazir's vow, because remember, most Nazirs were not lifetime vows, unlike Samson, who had rather special circumstances. You would bring the hair as part of the offering. And if that hair gets mixed up with other hair, there's no way to swap it out, exchange it, redeem it. All the hair becomes off limits.
What were the usual years? I always thought that the Nazarene would always have all their lives. So
Nope.
What was usually the
It was up to the person. So some people would do a month, some people would do a year, some people would do longer. But yeah, there wasn't, I think, or at least we don't have stats on the average.
Next is the firstborn of a donkey.
Okay, so you can't actually bring the donkey because the firstborn usually would be a sacrifice, because we don't do donkey sacrifices. We only do sacrifices of clean animals, of kosher animals. So you would have to redeem it. And that means you need to make sure that the thing that's going to be the newborn that you need to redeem for it gets mixed up with other newborn donkeys. So all the donkeys become unredeemable, I guess would be the proper English word. So basically the same thing. If there's an animal that is specially designated and it gets mixed up with other things that you cannot tell the difference between them, then you can no longer redeem it or take its value out and apply it to something else. You're stuck with all of them becoming off limits.
But the firstborn of a donkey was specially designated for sacrifice.
The firstborn of everything.
Secondborn, but the second, the third, the other, it's not.
Correct, right. The firstborn of every animal was considered special.
Special. Don't tell my sister that. Meat cooked in milk.
Okay, so again, this is one of those kosher things. You actually cook the meat in milk, and then you mix that piece of meat up with other pieces of meat, presumably in a way that you can't tell the difference. Then all of the meat becomes off limits. Right? There was about $5 worth of meat in there. So tell you what, I'll get rid of $5 and then the rest of the meat. That way I'm not benefiting from it. This is going to become an important caveat within the next text. That's not allowed.
But this is not the same thing as I was cooking meat and some milk fell into it. If it was less than 1/60th, I could do it. Here,
Correct.
1/60th doesn't matter.
Right.
Anything.
Right. Well, the meat itself, having been cooked,
Small,
you're not allowed to eat, right? So
right. Smallest quantity of milk doesn't matter. That's right. So
It's a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah.
has to be. Also prohibited is the scapegoat.
Right, so this is from the Yom Kippur ritual. Once the goat has been designated as the goat and it becomes mixed up, sorry, all the goats are off limits.
And also non-consecrated animals slaughtered in the temple court.
Okay, so you're not supposed to slaughter these animals in the temple court. And once you have slaughtered, they're off limits because you were doing something you weren't supposed to. If they get mixed up with others, we're out of trouble. We're out of luck.
These are all prohibited and are rendered prohibited by the smallest quantity.
Okay. However, 510, well, 510 is going to give us, I see people shivering. I'm going to.
Oh, gosh.
No, it's good.
You're okay? Okay. So 510, we're going to see a little bit of a pushback on this.
If yayin nesach fell into a vat, the whole of it is prohibited for use.
Right? So this is sort of what we've been talking about.
This is still wine, right?
But we're still wine. We're back to wine.
Yes. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, the whole of it may be sold to non-Jews with the exception of a quantity corresponding to the value of the yayin nesach in it.
All right. So this is the Yiddishikaf, right? This is the right.
It.
What's that?
I like it.
Yeah. So it makes sense, right? So what's the issue here? The issue is I'm not allowed to eat their wine or drink the wine, I guess, and I'm not allowed to benefit from their wine. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel neatly handles both those issues. Sell it to somebody that's not Jewish, so no Jew is going to drink this wine, and I'm going to get rid of the value of whatever wine entered it, so that means I'm not benefiting from it.
Right.
The Gemara goes into great detail on this. But basically, there are ways regarding certain quantities and forms where Rabban Gamliel wins, or Shimon ben Gamliel wins. So with certain caveats, his position does what's the word? Does win the day. He actually comes out on top with certain caveats. And I'm not going to go into all the details because the Gemara takes a lot of time to go into all the details. But you are advised, if you want to know more, to look it up. But basically, his proposition is agreed. That yes, you're not benefiting from it in this way, and you're right. Within certain circumstances, this can work. This can work.
The unusual part of an individual won the case.
Well, it's unusual and not unusual, because what the Gemara will often do is when they want to side with an individual, they will say this individual is talking about the following parameters, and the majority was talking about a different set of parameters. So they end up with both sides winning, but defining the cases differently. So that way, one was right for this and one was right for that. So it's a very Jewish solution. What?
Yeah.
Sound very Tosafot.
Yes, well, it's exactly what the Tosafot would do. Is they reconcile by saying, you have to understand the differences between these two different cases. And we're going to see something similar in the next section. Oh, sorry.
Mishnah 11.
No, go ahead. Mishnah 11, yeah.
First part, if a non-Jew covered a stone wine press with pitch, it may be scoured and then it's clean.
Okay, so yeah, this you have to read a little bit of the commentary on, because who here has a wine press?
Yeah.
Hands up.
No,
Who
in the
here
future.
who here knows why they're putting pitch in the wine press? Okay, so a little drawing. Our crazy ancestors and how they had to live. So
Oh.
here's my wine press, right? I've got all my grapes in it. What's the problem when I start pressing the wine? What do I want the wine to do? What do I want the liquid to do?
Well, it pours off.
No, I want it to pour out into my barrel, right? So then I can save it and ferment it, and that's my plan,
Yes.
right? When you squish them, they don't always go where you want them to go.
Mhm.
So in order to make sure they don't go down different cracks and holes and other things,
Into the wine press itself.
you seal it. And the way you seal it is you take a black pen because it's pitch, and you smear pitch all along the inside, leaving just a hole for it to go out. So you make it watertight. Basically what they're doing is they're trying to make it watertight. Pitch, you know, the black stuff like for the road,
Tar.
right? Okay.
Oh.
Now, Hands up, everybody who wants to drink wine that was rubbed against tar, rubbed against pitch. No? Not a lot of hands? Yeah, our ancestors didn't want to drink that either. Jewish or non-Jewish people didn't want to drink that. So, long story short.
I was confused. I thought peach, the fruit.
Oh, peach.
That's a
Yes,
That's a peach.
What is the
No. Think like asphalt,
No.
right? Or like on the roof, the tar they use for the roof, the black sticky stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Can you write both to see the difference?
completely different.
Well, we are in an ESOP
Pitch.
class, okay?
English
pitch.
is very difficult.
Right? And no T.
Okay.
Right? So long E, short I, T, no
Okay,
T.
gotcha.
Pitch, peach. And yeah, on that, differences make. 'Cause
Although
although I like your image of peaches rubbed all along the inside.
That's not.
Peach flavored wine.
Why not to put a peach in the wine? Really?
Okay, but what you are going to do, because pitch is horrible, is you're going to add wine to the pitch. You're going when you're mixing the pitch to get it ready, you pour wine into the pitch before you rub it, because that makes the pitch not so nasty for the wine that's going to come into touch with it. Now, I don't know how much this really helped.
Well, and also because the pitch now has wine in it, the wine that's up here is going to be absorbed so much.
Perhaps, right.
in
So
there.
whatever they thought it worked. That's the important part, is this is what they did. So now we have idolatrous wine mixed with the pitch inside the wine press.
Oh.
That's the
Get
problem.
rid of everything.
What?
Done.
Well, so that's the problem. That's where the issue.
And
So
people used to do this. They put the peach in the.
yeah. Think of it. So we're going to get into the next Mishnah where it's a wooden wine press. How would you keep the wine inside the wooden wine press while you're stomping and squeezing and pressing without it going out all the cracks? You have to make it watertight. They don't have silicone. They don't have rubber mats or plastic sheets or any of that. So they got pitch. Yes. Welcome to the ancient world, my friend.
And they survived. Unbelievable.
Yeah, well, not a lot of them did, but
Now I understand.
yeah, mortality rates weren't great. But anyway, this is the issue here is the wine mixed with the pitch that's been used to line the inside of the wine press. Okay, and then the Gemara, it talks about this being done before they've actually started making wine in it. So it's, you bought a wine press, or the guy came and did the wine press, and you're like, an idolater did this. What do I do? Right? What do I do? Answer for number one, right, is if he did this and he hasn't used it to make idolatrous wine. This is a like new wine press. The Gemara goes into more detail on this. Make the wine press usable by me, then what can I do? I can scour it, right? I can clean it roughly, all of the inside, and that's good. That's enough.
Clean
Still
what
got
they-
one.
Clean the
Outside.
pitch.
Huh?
Clean the pitch.
From outside.
Well,
Inside.
yeah,
Inside.
No,
So-
yeah.
like this is the wine, right? I'm
Yeah,
cleaning
yeah.
the inside. I'm rubbing the pitch. I'm scouring, cleaning the pitch.
It goes against the law of quantity, because the quantity doesn't matter. You have a little something with Nesach,
Right.
Nesach, kills the whole thing now.
So this is why they have to actually make a Mishnah for it, right? Because if you didn't have this Mishnah, you would think, like Yara, that the whole thing is off limits.
No, because they say that any amount
Yeah.
makes not go.
Any amount in what?
In the wine.
So is this in wine? It's in
Yes,
pitch.
Because it's in
Yeah.
touch with the
Ah.
wine.
That's why we need the Mishnah,
And especially if they mix the pitch with wine, what happens if they mix the pitch with wine that is from the idolaters?
right?
So
And
makes everything impure.
no, that's why we have the Mishnah to
Yeah,
clarify
that's
for
what
us,
the Mishnah says.
right? That's why the Mishnah comes
That's it.
to say. That's why the Mishnah comes to exclude this from our whole list of one drop rules. That a drop of the wine in the pitch.
Very convenient.
Now, I should point out, because the Gemara goes on to say that if they've used the wine press to make idolatrous wine, you have to scrape all the pitch out and start all over again. right? That if they've actually been using this to make the wine, then
And still allow they use the press. I thought
Yeah.
you
what's the
cannot.
press made out of?
Wood.
What's the press made out of in part 1? Stone,
Ah, stone.
right? Stone is permanently kosherable, right?
Oh, okay.
So it's one of the
Ah,
it's one of
so,
the,
yeah.
it's one of the best materials as far as kashrut goes, right? So nice big granite countertop, you're in business, right? That's and in fact archaeology has backed it up that they find many things from the Second Temple period that were made from stone, especially in Jerusalem, because stone doesn't contract ritual impurity, and so it's like a perfect material. Okay, and a lot cheaper than glass back then. Glass nowadays is much better. Okay, part 2,
But if it was made of wood,
which is not so easy.
Correct.
Rabbi says that it may be scoured, and the sages say he must peel off all the pitch.
Right, so Yehuda Hanasi, that's Rabbi here. He says, oh, just do the same thing like you did for the stone. And the rabbis say, no. You got to peel it all the way off and start all over again.
If was Nathan there, we say you cannot use with wood.
I know.
Do anyone? No, they absorb.
Right.
They wouldn't
So
absorb.
it's nice that you're so machmir, but
Maybe
I
I'm
have
like
no
an
money,
almost
But
Nathan.
have you ever
I need to
heard
buy a
have,
new one.
have you ever heard the expression more Catholic than the Pope?
Oh, that's a good word.
Right, that when the law says this is the minimum, you are allowed to take on a stringency by yourself. But remember, the rabbis were not talking about their own personal spiritual stringencies. They were trying to interpret the Torah and all of the rules of it in order that everybody would be able to live by them.
No, but I'm follow their logic. It's
Mhm.
not just me because I want to be more.
So you think, wait, but you think wood cannot be made kosher?
What?
You think wood can't be made kosher?
What that's me can be.
So if you have a wooden cutting board,
Yeah.
and the wooden cutting board is normally used for meat, or normally used during the year,
Yeah.
and now you want to use it during Pesach,
Hot wood.
are you allowed to use the cutting board? Is there a way to clean it for Pesach? No, it's not that complicated. If there are big cracks and big dinks and gaps in it, then yes, then we have a problem. But if it's just a normal wooden cutting board, all you have to do is scrub it down, make sure there are no bits in it, like you said, no cracks and other issues, and you're fine. Wood is not a big problem for kashrut.
Dishes that I can't clean for myself.
And that's part 3,
Because if it was made of earthenware,
which is usually what China is considered because it's made out of clay.
even though he peeled off the pitch, it is prohibited.
Right. So here Rabbi Natan is in agreement, right? If it's a clay press, then clay absorbs and never fully releases and never is impossible. It's impossible to seal it again with this new layer of pitch. You're just done. Right. So you're done. All right. We've only got one more. We've got to do it tonight. I'm not going to do one and then Megillah next week.
No. Number 1, if
Sorry,
a
earthen, what is earthen?
Pottery, clay,
Clay.
ceramic,
ceramics. I mean, there are some questions about fully sealed modern porcelains where the glaze is a glass form that covers the entire thing and there's no earthenware visible, but that's a whole nother
But that's
discussion.
not ceramic is a good material for kashrut.
Well,
That you can use the same one dish of ceramic for both.
not generally.
no.
Not generally. I mean, because it's basically at heart a clay substance, a clay base, it usually follows the laws of earthenware, Ferris. And that means it's off limits. However, there have been some discussions about modern ones that don't have that little ridge at the bottom where it's not been glazed. You know, like most plates, if you turn them upside down, the bottom of the plate is rough, right? That's like the big problem, is because that bottom part still absorbs. But there are some where the entire thing has been sealed with a glass coating. And then it really depends upon what's really in the glaze, how thick the glaze is, whether there are cracks in the glaze.
Glass, yes.
Glass is great. Yeah, glass is great, but glass and ceramic are not the same thing. Although, you know, we might argue that glass comes from sand, which is a type of earthenware. The rabbis say no, glass is not like that. So glass is a super material. All right, 512.
If a Jew buys cooking utensils from a non-Jew, those which are customarily used with cold liquids, he must immerse.
All right, so you buy a ladle not ladle is bad because you buy an ice cream scoop. You buy an ice cream scoop from a non-Jew, and you have to imagine that the non-Jew has been scooping non-kosher things with the ice cream scoop. All right, we're not talking about new here. That's another topic, but we're talking about used. So you've bought the used ice cream scoop, and you know he loves triple fudge pig ice cream. We're going to make sure that you understand that he definitely are sure that he's been doing something that wasn't kosher with this. What do you do to now be able to use the ice cream scoop? Or are you just out of luck?
You wash it.
You wash it. Right. Cold on cold doesn't absorb. Again, those of you who are staying for the kosher bonus class, we will get there eventually. Cold on cold doesn't absorb. You have to clean it. You have to make sure there's no bits of the triple fudge pig.
But you clean with cold water.
You just clean with water.
Yeah.
Clean cold water, or you have to.
You have to clean it.
Because they say immerse. Immerse is to like.
That's part two.
Water.
No,
immerse
no,
just means
that's
dip
part
it
two.
in.
Just clean it.
Immerse only means.
Right. There are some who
dip it
say just mikvah is perfectly
Right.
fine.
Okay.
Right. But that's cold for cold. Part two is dealing with things that are used for heat.
because those which are customarily used with hot liquids must be dipped in boiling water.
Right. So now I buy the ladle from him, and I know that he's been serving whatever non-kosher stew with that ladle. And again, we have the different issues of different substances and all of that. So his clay ladle, I'm never going to be able to use, and the glass ladle, do they make them? Has very easy. But for a standard metal ladle, I have to dip it into boiling. Again, this is after it's not been used for a while. It's all been cleaned.
That's why we have one refrigerator, not two. Because cold doesn't.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay.
It's cold and cold never transfers in Jewish kashrut. So you can absolutely have one refrigerator without an issue,
Okay.
as long as you're following basic hygiene. I mean, if you have
Yeah, but
raw
all
meat
the-
dripping onto your cheese, that's a problem.
Yeah,
But
but
that's a
all-
problem not just because of kashrut.
But for your logic, okay, you should have two ovens.
So ovens are a little bit more complicated, right? And
If you follow the logic,
we're going to get to ovens in just a second, because that's part 3.
Those which are customarily made white hot in the fire, he must make white hot in the fire.
Right. So if you normally use something and it gets literally color changing hot, then in order to kosher it, you have to make it color changing hot. And then 4 as well,
A spit and grill must be made white hot.
right? Because that's as hot as they could normally be during their usage. You have to make them. The rule that's used in Jewish law is as it absorbs, so does it expel.
this is exactly all the law to clean for Passover.
Yes, of course. Where do you think they come from?
No, I know, they're not.
Right.
And so see they now. Like,
Yes, and what's ironic is people think about them for Passover, but they don't think about them when it comes to kashrut. Because for kashrut, we, again, coming back to the luxury that we have, pot and a dairy pot, it's easy to not have to worry about it. But if I only have a meat pot, week I need to use it to cook something that's dairy, right? Well, how do I turn my meat pot into a dairy pot? And this is telling me how. Well, it depends. It depends on how you use it, and the way you use it, that's what you have to do to get it out.
So when they say to boil with water or just put the pan there on the fire. And that's
Boil always means water.
boil.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
No, that's a moral principle.
I think they use it also. The same
Okay,
way,
maybe someone does, but that's not the usual
the way
technical.
you use it, you have to.
Right, the way it
Caution.
absorbs is the way it
Yes.
expels, is the usual phrasing. And then part A,
But a knife may be polished and it's then ritually cleaned.
right? So a knife is a little bit different from the way it gets. What's the right? One of the things that's a distinction here is, however, you understand, is we're talking about knives here that are not being used like with actual cooking on the grill, right? The knife that gets hot because you're using it with something hot, that has the rules of things that get hot. But a regular knife, it doesn't usually get hot. You just, you're cutting cold meat or something. Then all you have to do is just simply grind it down and you're good.
It's interesting. I remember in the army one day we were running out of knife from Hanabi was I can't remember.
From one of them.
Yes, and one of the soldiers was Orthodox. they went to the rabbi in the yeshiva and asked them how can they convert, because the Rasab asked, okay, we need more of the sakumo, the
Utensil. Meat.
and he said that you need to put in the air
Yes.
like 3 times, I think.
Gemara talks about 10, but there's different,
3 or
right,
7, I
right.
remember.
So the idea is you plunge it into the earth,
Yes.
that's polishing it, right? Because the hardness, the sand,
Yeah.
that's like grinding it.
That's why it's that's the polishing part.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, and after that, they're supposed to do what? I don't remember now.
No, well, I mean, it had to be cleaned, and then you just had to polish it up. But these are for things that are not being used with heat. If they were things that were used with heat, then you have to use the regular heat options.
And what is, okay. So like sand.
Yes, exactly. All right. So we have finished Avodah Zarah, and we will start with Megillah next week.